Okay, good morning. This is Glenn Greenidge and Tom Pope, and we're community organizers, activists. And today we're going to talk about what's been, floating around the protests around the world, George Floyd situation, and the knee on the neck for too many minutes, to say the least, that contributed to his death. So, what's your take on it, Tom? What do you think? Where do you think that we are in the conversation around racism?
I don't know if we've actually succeeded in having a conversation because I think white America still has no idea of what's going on. We have some exceptions like Kaepernick, but look at the resistance he's confronted with. The idea of putting ourselves into the shoes of a minority person is very difficult for many white people. So we haven't really delved into that. The protests recently have made me think of several different things. On one level, I responded to a Facebook comment about the anger. And I made a comment that nonviolence usually is a good way of fighting an oppressor. The problem is if you're filled with anger and have no idea of any recourse, then it's almost like the time for violence. We don't denigrate the violent activities of the Sons of Liberty for throwing tea in the harbor, destroying property.
Right.
But we denigrate other examples. That was one thought that went through my mind. Another thought is when I do see some violence from looting, I often wonder how much of this is happening from the protester and how much is this happening from the many reports we get about police agents who are dressed as protesters who are starting this.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because one of the things that they said about Minnesota was that the burning and the set on fires and what have you were from outsiders, and they weren't from people from the community. And so, you always have to wonder what, like what, who's really responsible, because this is because the violence actually takes away from the message. The message is that we need to do some things about racism, about injustice, social injustice, education, and healthcare. Those are the disparities that are showing up big time in this conversation. And when you have the violence, what you're left with is the violence, is the breaking up of the community, of the people whose businesses are now being impacted, who are not necessarily directly related to the cause, but the anger. And
so you could be turning a possible ally into an enemy.
Right. And that's for me, that's never a good thing. I understand the anger. I understand the frustration. I understand the not being heard. And I think it was Martin Luther King, or I believe he said that violence is the result of not being heard. And so now that we've been heard, now what? Now let's channel the conversation and the actions, the next steps towards you know um, the the inequities that exist. And I think that's the real
Um,
conversation.
when you say we've been heard, have we been heard? Um, I keep hearing stories about ongoing violence by the police. When we see comments from the president, like when the looting starts, the shooting starts, that's telling me we have not been heard.
Well, again, we're getting mixed messages because he's also is being divisive in his conversation. And the thing that when I'm left with or some of the things that occurred yesterday is that police forces were actually kneeling down and praying with the protesters. You know,
How many examples of that do you think are happening?
not enough, not enough, Tom, because th- there's something that becomes available when you get the other person's humanity. We often talk about in the world of transformation is that you have to, you know, you have a bridge and you're on one side of the bank, the person's on the other side of the bank. You have to walk across that bridge and look from where they're looking from and see what they're seeing. And then you have an opportunity to maybe take their hand and bring them over to the other side. But you have to look from where they're looking from. And the the thing that has caught me, that surprised me the most, is that this is not just a national conversation, but this has actually become an international conversation where people are protesting in London and Berlin and other places around the world around the injustice. And I was talking with a friend of mine, and she remembers a time where until the Birmingham police had turned the hoses on and the dogs on Black folks in Birmingham, Alabama, that's when the world outrage came into play, and that helped to solidify the conversation of civil rights. That made it more than just a national conversation. It made it international, and I think that that's what's going on now.
But can that still occur? You're talking about a time when we had a media that was able to do this. The media today is so focused on avoiding scenes like that that they don't show those scenes. Instead, they're showing scenes of the dangers of the protesters.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that that's the narrative that we have to understand and work with. Because here's the thing: the cops aren't going anywhere, and there are lots of good cops. You've got a few bad apples. I think that part of the climate of law enforcement is to protect the good ones and the bad ones. And if you're protecting or covering up for a bad cop, you might as well be a bad cop yourself. And I think that that's part of what needs the culture change that needs to take place in the police department.
This is a massive undertaking, the breaking of that culture within the police department, because the code is you back your fellow policemen, you even though you see him plant a gun or drugs someplace, how can we break through that effectively? I'm thinking also in line with this of Gandhi's great ideal of non-cooperation. In the present situation, we're thinking of the real culprit. The eye is right now on police enforcement as the major part of the situation. If we target that as the problem, how do we target the police with non-cooperation in dealing with them, and at the same time encourage those police officers who want to join us by taking a knee?
Well, there's a couple things, and you know, we can't just solidly put this in the police department, because that they're part of it. I mean, when you look at it, there's an economic, social economic impacts, there's educational impacts, there are job impacts are related to that economic, and those are all part and parcel of the conversation. So I guess the question that I see, or is wanting to be asked, is having the police work with the communities. You know, one of the things that I've been advocating and working with is knowing, you know, the commanding officer, knowing, you know, the sergeants, knowing some of the people there, so that if there is a situation, I have enough relationship, I can say, oh, Deputy Inspector so-and-so, here's what I think is going on. Here's what needs to happen. Here's what, you know, and to be able to have an ear to the commanding officers so that they can understand it. Now, they've got to have the individual cop on the beat has to have that sensitivity training as well, so that he understands that you have to approach people in a respectful manner. So, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
From a political point of view, though, you may have the ear of that person in the precinct, but if that person in the precinct is seen as helping community leaders like you, this person's going to be shunned by people around him in the precinct, and he might be told to back off from helping you in the future. How do we avoid that type of problem?
It all comes from the top. I mean, it really is. You've got to have the police commissioner, you've got to have the mayor, you've got to have, you know, the governor, and quite frankly, we need leadership from the presidency. I mean, you know, we need leadership that is effective, that is having open conversations and communication.
Oh, we're not having that right now from the president, the governor, and actually, we're having problems with the mayor.
Yeah, he kind of put his foot in his mouth and kind of, you know, kind of tried to justify the cars running over people, pushing back the barricades, and I was like, I don't know about.
Well, it's not only that. Jumaane made a comment about why are we cutting the community services 40% because of the loophole, the problem in the budget, and we're not touching the police department.
Well, I mean, those are completely valid conversations, because we as a society think that if we don't have enough policemen, we can't control, you know, the masses. And the truth is that if you if you establish a relationship, anything can be resolved, but you have to be in communication.
And maybe half of the money going to the police department should then be spent on things like community services to help deal with community issues to prevent crime.
Exactly. You know, one of the things that is going to be huge this summer is the summer youth employment program. That's been cut out. That's, I don't know how many, 20 or 30,000 youth are not going to be working this summer and doing something productive.
So if we talk about having a society where we're trying to defeat crime, we're putting in seeds that would sprout more crime.
Exactly. Instead of less. Because as you said, I mean, we've got to, it's got to be an integrated approach. It can't be one without the other. Both have to have some partnership. It's about partnership, partnering up with the community, partnering up with the because let's face it, just like there are isolated incidents in the police force, there's isolated incidents of crime in the community. And so they're not the majority of people, but they then make it bad for everybody else. And so you got to communicate and get those eradicated some kind of way.
As a community board leader, what can you do in your community to sort of mobilize people to have a protest or non-cooperation with certain entities that would help make these changes?
Well, I'm always been an advocate of protesting, but non-violently, not the violence that goes with it, because I think there's something about when the numbers show up, you get people's attention. The question then becomes, how do you channel that energy long term to put the policies and changes in place that are needed to really impact and move society?
Well, this is why certain aspects of nonviolent theater are important, like having people supposedly lying on a lawn to show that they are dead, to evoke an image in the mind of people around a certain building, or sitting in with cuts around their face from special effects. This is like casting an image that would be used in a nonviolent way to show the dangers of a certain action.
No, all of those are going to be needed. We need all the different access point and avenues. I think that the real conversation is, in order for change to occur, how's it go? There's a quote by Benjamin Franklin. I'm going to look to see if I posted it on I posted it in Facebook a couple of days ago, and it really speaks to making a difference. And I'll paraphrase it. It says that when the people who are unaffected are as outraged as the people who are affected, then change is possible.
Well, how do we achieve that? How do we get them affected?
That's I think if we had the answer to that.
Gandhi succeeded with the SALT movement,
Right,
because it hurt the British
right.
salt industry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we need to have something like that that would affect the people in that police culture.
Yeah, we do. I agree. I don't think that we don't have that kind of leverage. And without that kind of leverage, um, it's kind of like the Boston Tea Party. They threw the tea bags in, they destroyed their property. They said, we're not going to pay the taxes and we don't even want the tea, and destroyed it. Now, again, violent back then. Um, but it was a very powerful economic impact that the salt had with India and the British. Um, you know, July 7th, there's a protest being planned, and it's kind of like a economic protest. Don't buy. Um, and I think that when you look at the economic impact that people of color contribute to this country, you see it in the um, frontliners. Now, they're not all doctors and nurses, but they're bus drivers, they're subway drivers, they're conductors, they're people who are enabling other people to get to their job and do their job. They're the grocery clerks. They're the packers that are, unloading the trucks and packing the shelves. All these folks are essential workers, and I don't know that's been recognized as the heart and soul of the economics of this country. And so I think that this whole COVID-19 has had us look at all of those things, look at manufacturing, the lack of manufacturing that's being done in this country. When we've got all these labels from China, it's having us look at, well, who is essential? Can I work from home? Is that something that I'm going to need to, want to, can afford to, both as an employee and employer going forward? So massive.
Um, we are tying a lot of things together because the things do connect and the things do all contribute to racism. However, in trying to focus the public's attention on a primary issue, this becomes vastly confusing to the average person. We have to draw their attention very, very laser beam oriented.
Succinctly. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I think the major problem that has to really be addressed at this moment is, why is it so necessary to use violence against a minority person that you suspect may be a criminal? Why do you expect that person to be a criminal? What is the behavior around that says, oh, it's okay for the white person to do this, but not the minority? Why does a hood represent a threat? Why does anyone represent a threat? Those behavioral items have to be looked at because we're seeing violence being used very quickly in many areas.
One of the things, that's great. You're absolutely right. Because one of the things I saw last night, and I don't remember what city it was in, but one police officer, they took two police officers were holding down the one person. One of the policemen actually had the same knee on the neck. The other police officer grabbed his knee and pushed it over so that it was on the guy's, shoulder rather than on his neck. And I think that it's that kind of thinking that, listen, if I can go to jail for being this aggressive, then I need to think twice, because do I really want to jeopardize my job, my pension, my family, and my future? and I think that that hasn't even occurred in policemen's minds before.
So, the oppressor has always managed to drive a wedge in the opposition and divide people and have them fight each other. Maybe we should use that strategy. Um, Imagine a campaign to create how to be a good cop, and people with placards, be a good cop rather than an aggressive cop. Um, that might help to draw out some of those people you just described and give them a kind of strength to buck the system within the police culture.
Absolutely. I mean, it's gonna take all of that. It's gonna take social campaigns, internal to the police department, and external, because the outrage that exists for those kind of activities, um, and it's about attitude. It's about how do you approach and any situation is volatile. We had the sheriff um, in Flint, Michigan, and he went into the crowd. He didn't know what else to do. He went into the crowd and spoke to the leader of the protest and said, "What do you need? What do you want?" And the response was, "We want you to walk with us." And he did. And you talk about, that's the thing I was talking about, crossing that bridge and looking from where they're looking from. Now, you know, I don't know that he's going to put any new policies in place but to his men, he made a message. That was a leadership moment that he took charge and said, this could be another way. It was heading down a particular tunnel, and he chose a path that altered that.
Now, this leader was able to do that because something inside him or um, a peer, um, maybe an earlier role model, gave him the courage to go against the system. I think we have to look at ways of creating that support so that other leaders like him can go against the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Because for me, that was a defining moment. That was a moment that said, "Look, I get you. We're not all like that, and I'm with you." Because that what took place should never have taken place. And you want to also include that, and I thought Governor Cuomo did a very great presentation around it. And he said, "Look, Rodney King," and he looked at Rodney King to and he Abnum Louis, all the different Sean Bell, all of the different occurrences. He says nothing has changed unless we, the people, make the change, and it really is about that sheriff being we the people, not being the we they, but being
Right.
and saying, okay, good. What do you need? What's the humanity that needs to take place here? And it was actually moving for me to see that and to experience that and to know the anguish and the grief and the frustration that I've bared all these years personally, and to know that there are folks out there and police departments that have actually said that this was murder, that this shouldn't have been. I mean, I don't know that I've ever heard one policeman say that about another police incident. So times are changing. So there's something afoot, and it's the opportunity to keep closing the gap, keep having the conversations that are going to move this thing forward. And listen, it's not going to happen tomorrow or the day after. Um, this is going to be a chip away kind of a moment. You got to keep chipping away at it, chipping away at it, chipping away at it. And the difference right now is that it's on video.
Right.
This thing occurred. I had a friend of mine beat up around the corner here back in the 70s. We were out. Fortunately, I wasn't there that night. But they're around the corner, laughing, talking, weren't drinking, weren't doing any drugs, just fellas being fellas. And the cop came and said, "Move off." And one of the guys said, "Well, we're not doing anything. We're just standing here talking." And that was enough for the cop to go off. And of course, he got arrested. His face and his hands look like George Foreman's hands. They're all puffed up and beat up because what they did is they handcuffed him to the locker and worked him over. Those things, do those cops ever get even reprimanded? Probably not. So I mean, so this is not something new, but I'm standing in possibility that something is altered. That this massive display of brutality is sending a message that this is not okay, and that people around the world are actually in that conversation. And so we shall see. I mean, we shall see. And I mean, that's the only place I could stand right now, and be willing to be the person that initiates and looks for and create what I can do in my sphere of influence to move it forward.
Well, I'm certain we'll continue this somewhere down the road. But it's an important day, and I think we have to keep on looking for ways to attract the average person in the middle who isn't aware of what's really going on to see what's happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're going to sign off for today. Glenn Greenidge, Tom Pope, give us your views, give us your response, give us your any topics that you want us to talk about. We're here to serve the community. Thank you.